Yeah, a really warm welcome to everyone to our Empowering Women's Leaders event today. A particularly warm welcome to those that are watching online afterwards also. Before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment, particularly when it's one of these kind of interactive events, to invite everyone to be really present. Here it's really hard when you've had a busy day. I know myself, I kind of felt a bit frazzled before I came on, but I think the great thing about these events is, what we put in, we get out, and we've got some absolutely fantastic speakers lined up. So I just invite everyone. It's an interactive event. We encourage you to, come off mute, get involved in the chat, all that kind of thing. So really appreciate everyone taking out the time in the lead up to this event. Also, if we're sharing anything after the event, I encourage you to use the hashtags Inspiring Inclusion and Causeway, share on your social media channels. One of the great things about Causeway and what it does is connect people across the Irish Sea. And so I'd encourage you post your LinkedIn in the chat. Let's all connect and kind of create a great environment of empowering women that we can lean on within our networks. So just a little bit about me. I'm a young professional member of Causeway and kind of one of the founding members of our Young Professionals Committee. And I'm also a client growth manager at a data and AI consultancy. I was looking this morning at kind of our EMEA leadership team, and actually 65% of our leadership team is female, which I felt particularly proud of in such a kind of tech-oriented, male-dominated industry. So I think for me, having those female role models is amazing, and particularly in Causeway with our two female co-chairs, it's absolutely fantastic that we have that. So the format of today is we've got 4 guest speakers that we're delighted to welcome, and we're going to have some breakout networking sessions. For anyone that's maybe hasn't in a while been involved in one of these kind of virtual networking sessions, it's very informal. We're going to go into breakout rooms, and it's a great opportunity to tell people a little bit about who you are, and it's a great environment to do that in. So we're obviously here for International Women's Day 2024, and I think it's great that we've actually brought ourselves back to the topic a couple of weeks after International Women's Day, and it's important to keep reminding ourselves that this inspiring inclusion is actually the 2024 theme, so it's great that we can kind of continually bring this back. So I'm going to kind of open the floor, open the conversation with a bit of a starting question. And I guess it's to just get the cogs thinking, in your situation, how would you rate the level of inclusivity in your workplace, community, sector, with regards to gender diversity? So I guess if we can think about it on a scale of 1 to 5, feel free to pop in the chat, but also feel free to come off mute and to kind of share an experience to get us kicked off. Is there anyone that would like to dive in? I guess Jennifer, as my co-host, I'll go to you as a bit of a starter point for us there.
So me and Judith were actually having this conversation, and Judith will speak more about it. And I think it's not only about what your sector currently looks like, but how you in your sector can promote it elsewhere. So for example, myself and Judith are in public relations and marketing. Our sector is notoriously female led, which is amazing, but also it's a double-edged sword. But how do we promote inclusivity on our client side? So that's an area that we're looking at, but I'm sure everyone knows that it's very, very female dominated.
Thanks so much, Jen, and thanks for the ratings we're seeing in the chat there. And I think it's a really interesting point to think about earlier in career, where I am versus kind of later in career. Has that changed over the time? And Ailish, I can see you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Ailish. I work for the Wildlife Trusts, which is a third sector organisation, and we do kind of conservation policy. And to be honest, most of the people, or at least the majority of people I work with, are women, but the problem that you have across the third sector is ethnic diversity. So that's something that charities, especially environmental charities, there's a bit of a kind of gap in diversity there. So it's great on the women front, but it's really, really poor on racial diversity across the environment sector specifically. There's a lot of kind of barriers there that prevent, real kind of diversity and inclusion across the sector.
Thanks, Ilish. That's a really interesting point. And I think what I'm seeing in the chat here is quite a diverse range between different sectors as well. Pierre, thanks for kind of giving us that comparison of a 2 versus a 4. I mean, that's quite drastic. Yes, Pierre, go for it.
Yes, if I can expand a little bit on that, it is interesting, because when I started architecture school in 2000, or some time ago now, there was a majority of men at university. When I left in 2005-6, there was a majority of women. So within these years, our profession as architect changed totally. And now we are verging on a 50-50, really. It seems that being a man or a woman in the architecture sector, doesn't really matter. No one thinks about that. Everyone thinks about what we are doing. So it's a welcome change. However, we are also involved on the BIM side, which is building information modeling. And it's really the data management and digitalization of the construction sector. And there is really a lack of diversity and inclusion. It's mainly men, and we feel that it comes from a background of sort of digitalization and programming, which attracted more men originally, even if it's changing. And I'll finish on that. We had a discussion with the Design and Technology Association, which is trying to promote it. And they felt that there's less interest for young girls and young women to get into that sector because there's no proper communication about it. It is something which is a big part of the construction sector now, but it's very much discarded in the education system in the UK globally.
Thanks, Pierre. And I guess it brings to mind what can be done to change this. And that I guess that's part of it's all a food for thought from today about how we can help in the industry. So thanks so much, Pierre, for sharing your thoughts. And Margaret, I can see you've raised your hand there as well.
Yeah, hi, Megan. Yeah, I'm Margaret Horsky. I'm actually calling in from South Carolina in the US. So it's just lunchtime here, but lovely to join the event. I suppose the comment I was going to make is that I've worked in, I suppose, health sector predominantly, but latterly in a more digital, technical context, although my approach would be more of the adaptive than the technical. And I suppose there's twice in my career that I think I felt an issue about my gender. One was at the big sort of early stages of my career when I had my first child, and there was a lot of pressure that you couldn't really be a full-time mother and work full-time. And I remember feeling very challenged about that and having to, almost overcompensate for that in terms of making sure you didn't leave work early or you didn't have to take time off. Now, thankfully, I think that has changed to a large degree, although maybe there's still some sense of that still being an issue for women. And I guess that sort of towards the sort of latter part of my career, again, I've been aware of being an older woman in the workplace, and certainly an implicit, I would say, bias around, you're a grandmother, you've got grandchildren, you want to spend time with your grandchildren, so it's almost what I experienced as a young person in my 20s as a young mother. It's almost you're labeled again as an older woman in the workplace. So I thought that's been quite interesting just in terms of what I've experienced. And as I say, I probably have worked in largely female dominated areas, although latterly probably more men, and certainly more men in senior positions than women. So interesting, yeah, just as my experience having worked for over 40 years, I've seen a sort of, a bit of, I would say, issues around gender in my younger age, as well as sort of this more mature stage of my career.
Thanks, Margaret. And I guess that's an interesting point that there can be as we move through our careers, whether that's changing industry or as we're kind of maturing through our careers that actually we can experience different kinds of bias or different kinds of inclusion all that kind of thing. So thank you so much everyone for sharing that, and I'm delighted now to pass over to Causeway co-chair Judith O'Leary to tell us a little bit more about herself and Causeway.
Thanks, Megan. That's been a really interesting start to the session, actually. Really, really interesting. So yes, as you say, I'm co-chair of Causeway along with Bridget, and we have been a powerhouse driving Causeway forward for the last two and a bit years. And what's really been great is that we work so well together as women together. And I think a lot of people have been inspired by that approach. And in fact, the next two chairs of Causeway, they are also going to be co-chairs, which is really good because they've seen how well it works with two people in this role. So a little bit about me. I worked in a PR agency as MD until I had my third child. And when I had my third child, I felt it was no longer sustainable. I was traveling to London every week and I had 3 children under 3, and very much chiming with what Margaret said. I went above and beyond to the point where I wasn't really doing anything right in my view. So I resigned, but what it did do is it gave me the opportunity to set up my own agency, which I did in 2001. Very conscious decision is that I wanted it to be an all-female agency. And I know that can be quite divisive, but for me, I thought I want to do things differently. I want to create an agency that can support women and support women at all stages of their careers and their life stages. So, you know, I was the mum that went back to work when my child was 3 months, and I stopped breastfeeding when she was that age, simply because I was going back to work, and I wanted to create a space where people didn't have to do that. So that's something that I've been very proud to have continued throughout the whole time that the agency has been in operation. In terms of diversity, then we have none, and we're an approved agency for the PRCA, which is our sort of professional organisation, and we were scored down on diversity, not only sex, but also we have a very white middle class team, and we have tried to have race diversity within the agency. Simply, people are not applying for roles within Represent, and that's something that we're working really hard with schools to try and bring people in who maybe aren't, who maybe feel that they can't or they don't see themselves in our agency. So that's something that we're working really, really hard with. But in terms of what we do, I think Jen made reference to it earlier, is we work with a very diverse client base, everything from tech, renewables, retail, education, healthcare, and manufacturing. And some of those are very male dominated. So as part of our role as strategic comms advisors to senior level people in these organizations, we really have inclusion very much as part of our agenda. And we try and challenge and support their clients when they try to look at how they can make sure that they're inclusive. So a lot of them, for example, I'm working with a charity at the moment, and they went out to a recruitment consultancy to recruit new trustees, and they came up with a short list of 7 men. So, again, challenging back to that recruitment agency to say, why is this the case? Is there an unconscious bias there somewhere in the communication of the role? And how can we make sure that we have women applicants? I'm also very strong advocate for the best person for the job, but there had to be something there within that, I suppose, marketing of that role that really didn't engage with women whatsoever. So we're back out to market again on that. But if that wasn't in my mindset, I think that would have slipped through. And the challenge for that then is that we could be challenged, certainly on social media, but maybe in the press, as to why, when you're going out and recruiting that number of trustees, that there weren't any women in that shortlist. So we go beyond the traditional tasks of PR to really promote diversity, inclusion in businesses. And we challenge clients to consider inclusivity on a very much a strategic level and assist them in campaigns and initiatives that really practice that diversity. For example, we're working with a really great organisation at the moment that's involved in peatland restoration. And we use the peg of International Women's Day to really highlight the people within their organisation who are young entrants into this sector. And one of the interesting insights we had for this particular client was women are involved in the sector, and I think, Ailish, you talked to that, but actually when it comes to setting the policy for environmental targets and policies and practices, that there are very few women on that sort of board level who develop those strategies and those processes. And actually, when you consider women are the ones that are most likely to be impacted by the effects of climate change, it's a real shame that those women are not part of that sort of senior level discussion. And that's something that we raised. And actually, when we put that out there on social media and on our blog, we got some really great feedback from it. We did get some detractors on there, some men saying, oh, just, get a grip, which is quite interesting that people are still feel comfortable to go out and say something so dismissive on social media was quite it was interesting to see. The other thing that we're looking at is age inclusivity. So going back to this client that we just spoke about, which was the charity client, I also challenged them to try and include 2 young people on the board that were under the age of 18. And that, I believe, is so important because, trustees of charities tend to be, people early or late on in their career who can give up time because it's an unpaid role mostly, who can do that. Whereas actually that's not an inclusive in thought process. So going back out and saying that, trying to get young people involved in this is so important to make sure that we're not only talking to ourselves, because it's very difficult to put yourselves in the shoes of people. For example, this charity is set in a town in Fife, and when we're all got cars, we think nothing of getting from one side of the town to another. When you're a young person, if you don't live in the town, you live outside, how do you get in? So therefore, how do you work? How do you get home safely from nightclubs? And it's that sort of insights that I think will really drive some really strong processes and maybe pillars for funding, which is what we're trying to do with this client. So that was quite interesting. In terms of also working with clients, we also try to say to them is, how can you improve your employer brand? So a big challenge for companies just now is recruiting good people. And again, how can we help them create a brand that people think, yeah, you are going to be a good employer? So we're working with one client at the moment who and proposed to them that they employ an external consultancy who work with women prior to going on maternity leave, during maternity leave, and coming back, to give them the skills and the confidence to feel that they can come back to the role that they were currently doing, broker that sort of conversations that sometimes may be difficult for you to have with your employer if you're not feeling that it's working well and you need to make some changes to how you currently work. This external consultant is about making sure that you don't lose your brilliant talent at the time when you really want to hold on to them because you've invested in them throughout that time. We also look to talk about the storytelling to highlight the diverse voices and foster inclusivity. Some great examples. I think one that we weren't involved with but actually inspires me massively was it was a campaign against living miserably by the charity Calm. And this was about, they asked people to upload the last photograph of somebody that they lost, and they lost that person due to suicide. So, you can see those photographs. This was taken 3 days ago, and three days later, this person committed suicide, and you can see a happy smiling face. And I thought that was a really powerful PR campaign that showed that, you know, we need to be inclusive of people at all stages of life and how they feel, and make sure that we're allowing people and giving them the power to be able to share how they're feeling. So that was super. And I suppose the one that we all remember is Dove. And Dove was that great campaign where it showed all women of sizes and shapes and race. And it just talked about the various backgrounds and inclusivity in beauty. And that's been running a long time now, but it was still in my mindset when I was looking at campaigns that I thought were very, very good. So I think the other thing we can do is look at, as part of our role, and something that I challenge the team on, is how can we work with other organizations that really help? If we can't be inclusive, how can we partner with an organization that can help us become more inclusive? And a good example of that was Virgin Money, when they connected with the Edinburgh Fringe to create Free Fringe. And that allowed people who couldn't perhaps afford to come to Edinburgh Fringe to apply for tickets and come along. So those are some of the initiatives that we use as part of our agency life to try and promote inclusivity amongst our team and our staff and our clients, to drive this forward. So hopefully that gave you some food for thought. I'm going to now, unless there's any questions, I'm sure we're going to take them at the end, but I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Jen, just to take you through the next stage of this event.
Hi all, thank you, Judith. A little bit about me. So I am a consultant in represent comms, as Judith mentioned, all-female PR and marketing team. As I said, PR and marketing is quite a female-dominated industry. My background is actually in law. I studied law, and similar to Pierre, I think it's interesting. It started off as a very male-dominated career, but I noticed in university that the majority of people I shared classes with were women. However, that transferring into a career, you can tell I'm not a qualified lawyer. I'm not a qualified solicitor. And many of my female friends who I met in university aren't. I think maybe one of them is currently trying to find a traineeship. So there's still a lot of work to do, but on the looking into these very male dominated or high pressurized careers. So I have the pleasure of introducing our first guest, who is Andrea Wickham Moriarty, who in August 2023 was appointed as Vice Consul General of Ireland in Scotland. Prior to this role, Andrea served as the Political and Consular Officer at the Embassy of Ireland, Zambia. She's a very well-traveled lady. Throughout her career, Andrea has lived and worked in Kenya, Chad, Iraq, and Ethiopia. So Andrea, thank you so much and welcome. We're going to kick things off, and I'm going to ask you a bit about your journey on how you became the Vice Consul General and how you got to where you are.
Yes, and as you pointed out, hello everyone and good afternoon. As you pointed out, it was quite a circuitous route. I didn't go directly from Ireland to Scotland. I went via a lot of places. Even when I was a teenager, I was always interested in international affairs and wanted to live and work overseas. I don't know where that came from. I graduated in 2007-8 into a recession in Ireland. So I actually was quite keen to be a diplomat, but there was a hiring freeze across the civil service around that time. So this kind of avenue was closed to me. So I ended up going into the aid sector and did some kind of charity work in Ireland, and then a master's. And then after that went to Kenya on a volunteer role initially, and then got different roles with quite a few different humanitarian aid agencies. So started off with UNICEF, moved to the International Rescue Committee, moving then to Chad, back to Ireland to Trocora, bounced around a lot basically. And it's a very demanding type of career, and it meant a lot of moving often at short notice. Like my assignment in Iraq was, I got a week's notice to move to Iraq, and that was a 6-month assignment. So I moved into the diplomatic sphere partly to maintain that international living and working, but maybe with a bit more stability and a bit more certainty and longevity. So now I kind of go to places for 2 or 3 years at a time. And I also joined the Department of Foreign Affairs as a diplomat just after I got married. So I think that also kind of coloured my view on the human, like a lot of my friends are still in that space. But now working with the department and moving around, there's a lot more kind of supports, I guess, to do that with the family. So that's kind of where I am now. And I said, yeah, I spent 3 years in our embassy in Zambia. The great thing about being a diplomat is that you kind of, what's inbuilt into your life and your work is kind of changed. And so my job changes every 2 or 3 years, whether that's moving from the embassy in Zambia to here. When I'm in Dublin as well, the roles change all the time. So I served in our Northern Ireland desk, I've served in our Middle East desk and our disarmament and non-proliferation desk. And they were all very different roles. Some of them more like female orientated, and that disarmament role was very interesting because that was a part of foreign policy that is kind of male dominated, arms control, nuclear weapons, that kind of thing. But I worked on the first Irish all-female team that were negotiating in the UN, which was quite interesting. I learned about the power of colour diplomacy in that role. So if you're in a room like that where there's hundreds of people negotiating, all the men are in these dark suits. So a lot of my senior female colleagues will wear like bright yellow dresses and orange dresses, and they'd really stand out. And it's actually a lesson I've carried. I'm actually not taking my own advice today, unfortunately, but the idea that you can use some of those tools at your disposal as a woman, I thought was really interesting, that you can be more brightly coloured and that makes you stand out and people kind of remember you and talk to you. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am now. And I've been here 6 months, and it's a great city to live in, Edinburgh. I have to say I'm very lucky to be here. And being an Irish person in Edinburgh and an Irish woman in Edinburgh is a great.
I agree. I'm also a newbie. I've been here coming up a year, so I've thoroughly enjoyed Edinburgh. You mentioned you now have a family, and as a young woman in the beginning of her career, that's kind of constantly something that's on my mind. But it seems like in the current career, there is an air of flexibility. But what challenges have you encountered as a female diplomat, and how have you overcome them to advance your career? Or, do you encounter any?
Yeah, and I think my experience as a female diplomat is largely coloured by being a mother. So I became pregnant within a year of joining the department, and I had my first child when I was in headquarters, and my second child in Zambia. So I think it was actually, the challenges were different. So in Ireland, I had a support system around me when I had my first son, and going back to work was a bit smoother in that sense, and there was a lot more flexible working options available. I have to say the department in Dublin is increasingly pushing job share options, 4-day week, different ways to encourage people back into the office in ways that works for them. And that's probably even increased since COVID, but I haven't been in headquarters since COVID. Returning the second time was a bit more challenging because when you're on kind of a posting, it's a very intense job. In Zambia, the workload was very high. We had a big team. It was very busy all the time. And similarly here, I do a lot of evening and weekend work, and trying to balance that with, missing bedtimes and dinner times, I find a real challenge. So part of the ways you overcome that is really work. I'm lucky that I have a very supportive spouse and a supportive manager here to kind of, I guess, rebalance that when needed. And we kind of both of us have a young family and sharing that. But also, I have to say, having a family as maybe at my own choice, maybe in part slowed my career. There were both times I got, just after both my boys were born, there were promotion opportunities, and I just didn't feel like I had the headspace either of those times to go for those roles, because I was like, I had a 6-week-old one time and 2 or 3 months, I was like, I don't feel ready to put myself out there just yet. I think I was, it's a big change to your life. So I definitely find that just timing has been unfortunate in that sense. My work has kind of very scheduled promotion opportunities, and I think I have probably sat some of those out because I've been a mother, and maybe a different woman might have chosen differently, or maybe my male colleagues would have chosen differently, but that's kind of something that's impacted me a little bit. I do also notice, and it's maybe not being a mother, but generally being a woman, that some of the roles that fall to me in the office can be sort of gendered. I don't know if other people find this. You're the one who remembers the birthdays and does the cards. You're the person who notices that the stationery cupboard's untidy and needs to be tidied. And yeah, but that work doesn't advance your career. Or there's loads of evidence around that other people can probably point to more. But you do find yourself. I find myself anyway falling into some of those kind of gendered roles at work, and having to step back and be like, it's not my responsibility to be the mom at work. I'm already the mom at home. I'm also the mom here as well. So that's something that I need to kind of work on a little bit to watch myself when I fall into that traditional sort of mom role.
That's really interesting about how, at home you have the gender roles and outside of work. and almost in your career, you want to see yourself as an equal playing field, but you naturally take on those roles. But you know, you are correct. We should probably start questioning the meaning behind getting a cup of tea, getting a cup of coffee for your male counterparts or anyone else.
My boss does get me the cup of coffee sometimes. I will do that.
God,
but
that's what I want to hear.
But the big thing about how advanced is learning from other. I see other women not doing that, and I think that how much we learn from others and watching how my more senior colleagues interact like that.
And I think this is important with this webinar is making a point like that. You know, women will start to realize those things that maybe they haven't even acknowledged. It's clear that you had a lot of support around you from colleagues and your family. For a woman to progress in the world of politics or government, do you think that support is the only way that you can progress in your career? Is there a way that this industry can open itself up to be more inclusive to women in, say, you know, single mothers or different communities and sectors?
It's a really good question. And there are structural issues and wider issues that I don't think the department can solve, but I think it is aware of them. Like my department, a bit like what Jude mentioned, doesn't really reflect modern Ireland. Modern Ireland is much more diverse now, and people from, you know, lots of different ethnic backgrounds, whereas the department remains largely white. It's something that it is reflecting on within its HR policy, is looking at kind of social inclusion working groups and kind of gender and equality and diversity working groups, but some of it will have to start almost at secondary school level and letting people know what a diplomat does and how to get into that. Because I think if you don't see it, you can't be it. So people don't even know that these kind of jobs exists. And there's also in some respects, the civil service maybe isn't that exciting. The diplomatic side maybe is exciting, but encouraging more people to work in the public sphere more broadly is quite challenging. On the politics question, I can't really answer that. But the amount of women who put themselves into the public sphere, I think we all know, receive very different treatment maybe than their male counterparts. I'm thinking about female politicians, parliamentarians, ministers that I can see even just through my own work. So I think addressing some of those communications challenges is part of it. Well, I can only say from what I said, I'm only one person, but I think I try my best to kind of support other colleagues. So maybe not from diverse backgrounds, but I did notice that there weren't many people in my position at my grade. There were at the time I was joining, not that many people were joining that a little bit older and with a family. So I kind of advocate for us to create a families officer within our union recently. And so I now take on that kind of role of supporting on an individual basis when people come to me with challenges they're having as a working parent or a carer in other ways. They're on me with the department, and then advocating for policy changes in some of those areas, and particularly around the kind of the postings, like picking up your life and moving it every 3 or 4 years is very disruptive. And if you want to keep people in this diplomacy work, you have to support them through that cycle, basically, of going to another country and then coming back again from it. I think our department has good statistics overall on female diversity. At least I think we're at 51 or 52% female heads of mission now, which is brilliant. But when you drill down to that, it's often, I don't think we've ever had a female ambassador to Berlin, for example, which is like a powerhouse, very prestigious one. But we've been, female ambassadors maybe to smaller missions and things like that. So the department is conscious of the gender diversity issues that need to be addressed and is getting there on that, but there's still work to be done on the kind of women from other backgrounds. We're and I'd love to talk more maybe to Judith about what you guys are doing to feed it back to our kind of HR department, because I am very conscious that as an Irish diplomat, me and my colleagues don't really represent modern Ireland yet. Hopefully that will change, but I think we'll need to do some very proactive communications and advocacy about what we do and why it's important for people from all backgrounds to
I think it is. You're right. I think it is a wider issue that many sectors need to consider and look to. You mentioned amazing points, including wearing colour, which I think is fabulous. I'm also not wearing colour, but I want to open up to the floor to anyone to ask some questions. And any comments to what you had to say, now's your time.
I would like to make a comment on something that you said. I'm Heather. I am a trainee solicitor at BTO in Glasgow. Just on what you were saying about seeing people at higher levels or just in the profession, it made me think that even now I'm in the profession that I aimed to be in, but even in terms of personal development and training, I think that the best skills and qualities that I learn is from seeing women in leadership above me have qualities that I wish to present. I know that I have colleagues within the firm and in the Scottish Young Lawyers Association, which I'm heavily involved with. I have colleagues in both of those areas that are strong in communication skills and things that maybe before I joined the profession I thought I could never have, and being able to see the kind of woman that I would like to become, I think is so essential. So I just thought it's really important for people who aren't in the profession, but it's still really important for people who are at junior levels to see that at higher levels as well.
I completely agree, Heather. Anyone have anything to add to that?
Andrea, I was going to say that I found your point really interesting about having children and then your career progression slowing. And you were talking about you're not, it was kind of by choice. Obviously, you didn't feel you had the headspace. And I think I'll talk about the GA in a minute, but with myself and my teaching career, I know that after my second baby, I went for a few interviews, and one of the pieces of feedback that I received was, how come you don't already have a promoted post? And it's like, well, because actually I had 2 babies and now I'm just coming back to sort of my career from that. So you do see the big career gaps, and I see lots of my male counterparts have promoted posts and heads of department and all of these situations that I haven't had the opportunity because I've either been on maternity leave or, as you say, when you come back, you're just getting your mind wrapped around working full time and being a mother again. So your point really resonated with me about that. So
thanks so much, Jen. Thank you, Andrea. It's been a great conversation. You have many points, and I'm sure you could go on for hours and we would all listen to you. I'm going to now pass it on to Megan, who will introduce the other Jennifer of the group, Jennifer Treacy.
It's so timely. We are already spotlighted, Jen. It's perfect. So I'm delighted. Thanks so much, Jennifer, my co-host. But I'm now going to introduce Jennifer Treacy, who's the first female chairperson of the Scotland GAA and only the 5th ever female chair worldwide in the organisation. Jen, thanks so much for taking out the time today to have a chat. And I guess just start us with a bit of your journey to becoming the first female chairperson of the Scotland GAA. I mean, what an absolute honour to kind of have that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think I didn't actually realize what sort of a big milestone it was for our organization until I was contacted actually by the Irish World about it, saying, do you realize you're the only 5th ever in the entire world? So that includes, if anybody knows anything about the Gaelic Athletic Association, they're in every single corner of the world. You can, I think Andrea probably knows, I'm sure they have a team in Zambia. So maybe, but anywhere in the world, you'll probably find some of the Irish diaspora and immigrants playing Gaelic football, hurling. I know that Uganda is very, very big on their hurling now. So it's great to see. So it stretches in every single corner of the world. And to be only the 5th ever, it was shocking because I thought really. And for me, it felt like just such a natural progression, I guess, within the organization. I started off as the PRO and really wanting to increase the exposure of Gaelic games in Scotland, and finding out that Gaelic games in Scotland have been around for 125 years, and there's still people who have no clue that it exists here. That I think I failed as a PRO. But we when I started, we had a closed Facebook page. We didn't reach out as much as we should have, and didn't promote our games. So I did that for a couple of years, and I stepped up to the secretary role. Not really realizing that the secretary role was something that everyone was happy for someone else to do, because it's quite a lot of admin. And it turns out that during my time as secretary, not only did I have both of my children, but also we went through COVID. And COVID was a really big challenge for a lot of sports organizations, as you can imagine. We were shut down. We were unable to participate in our games. And I think actually it improved our governance immensely, because we started doing all of our meetings on Zoom. We started to include it. It meant that the inclusion increased tenfold. People were able to just sign in and dial into a meeting. People were volunteering themselves for roles. It actually, I think, transformed our organization, and we have the most female officers in Britain, certainly, and I would challenge most county boards probably don't have as many female officers as we do as well. And basically, I came to it in a very structured, and I stepped up, and I had lots of allies along the way who encouraged me to continue to step up into those roles. I became the COVID officer for all of Britain. And I managed all of the return to play for Britain as well. And that was an interesting role, because I had to liaise with Sport Scotland and Sport England about certain procedures that we had in place to return to play. And I also had to check everybody's I had to do a sort of survey or form before every single training session to make sure that they didn't have any symptoms, and make sure if they did have symptoms, they were staying home. And so I had to go through, and I had to check all of those. And I think from day one, delegation was the name of the game, because otherwise I wouldn't have got through that time. Especially, as I said, with 2 young children, and then trying to manage return to play from COVID. I think during that time, a lot of the officers in Britain, I think, gained an appreciation for, I guess, my skills, my skill set of being able to organize, being able to get people on board, being able to increase participation, increase exposure, improve representation. And I think, the respect was built over time. It's a very, very male-dominated organization, and it mostly is semi-retired or retired individuals as well. So it's a shock to the system every time I'm there with 2 young children, and being female as well, and I guess also not being Irish, despite this really strange accent that I have accumulated. So I always caveat by saying I've got 2 things against me. 1, I'm a female, and 2, I'm not Irish. So the GAA is always a difficult place to navigate. But I think interesting, Andrea mentioned about colour, and I noticed that all the women in the room always make sure that they're well dressed and well represented and well remembered, I guess, is a good way of putting it. But I also think I can use some of these things to my advantage, because many people don't expect me to know very much about the GAA, about the rule book, about any of the processes. So I can sometimes use that to my advantage, where I can play maybe a little bit more naive and say, well, explain it, or how would you do this? And, it starts conversations, and it has helped me gain more insight into the processes in the GAA. So I don't know if I answered your question, actually. I just kind of got on a tangent.
No,
Sorry.
absolutely. And listening to you there, it's amazing that we've gone from the political landscape straight to the kind of sporting field, and there's so many of the same kind of challenges you're facing, in terms of particularly with relation to, having children, those kind of progression opportunities. But I think the amazing thing is you are now that role model in the senior leadership position for everyone in the Scotland GAA. So, even though I started off by celebrating you being the first female chairperson, but actually there probably should have been, that should have happened a long time before. So it's that irony there. So I know you mentioned about the kind of rules and your involvement, and I suppose you're both a player as well as a chairperson in GAA. And I guess, how do we actively promote gender equality, female empowerment within the athletes and within your coaching kind of methodologies and development? Yeah, how can we do that?
Well, this is the challenge, isn't it? I think one of the main philosophies of my coaching is not necessarily equality, but it's equity. Every single one of my players needs something different, regardless if they're an under 13 boy or if they're an under 14 girl. And there are different needs, and I do encourage them always to talk about equity of time, equity of effort, equity of thought. Now, my biggest campaign throughout my own clubs is to make sure that you're thinking about each of the sections of your club in the way that they need to be, I guess, elevated. So it depends on the time of year, it depends on how successful they are, but the GA shouldn't just be about the men's senior team. It's much more broad than that. It's what does the junior women's team need? What does the senior women's team need? What does the under 13 team need? Because especially in your youth, this is your future. These are your future players. These are your future administrators. These are your future volunteers. And how are they going to be inspired to be involved in their club? And that, for me, when I see some of the players that I've coached become coaches or become administrators within the club, that to me is much more impactful than them moving on and playing for the senior team, because that's a pathway that's always been there. And I think the pathways we're now making sure they realize is that they can be involved in the running of the club. They can have a say, their voices are heard and their voices matter. And that is one of the struggles, I think, in any amateur sport, is the players that are still playing think the administration's over here, the club's over here, and I'm just the player over here, and I'm not involved in that. And I think that's a big mistake, because then there becomes a disconnect between the way that the club is run and the players that are actually taking part in the club. So I do encourage the girls that I play with, the kids that I coach, to get involved in, the fundraising, or get involved in one of the social nights, or get involved and just impact the running of the club in that way, and make sure that they know that your needs right now, rather than thinking about when I have time, when I'm retired, then I'll go in and be part of it. That isn't the time to be involved. The time to be involved is right when you're in the thick of it and you have lots of needs that you care about. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, what a great relation back to last year's theme for International Women's Day was equity, and that really started switching my brain into the difference between equality and equity. So I'm glad to hear that that's trickling down, through your organization as a whole. It's a great framework to use throughout. I'm moving on to my last question with Jen, but what I'd like to encourage is, if anyone does have a question for Jen, pop it in the chat now, or Pierre, straight away there, ready to raise the hand. I love it. Jen, just before we open the floor, I guess, what is one piece of advice that you'd give for a young professional woman to encourage them to take on a leadership position?
I think it's take a small step. So if you're not ready to take that big step into that leadership role, take a small step. Discuss with your other colleagues, especially your other female colleagues, what sort of leadership roles you can either take on or shadow or learn. Take a small step, because then the small steps add up. Build your confidence in that way, because you probably have a lot more people on your team that are rooting for you and that are allies than you realize. So make sure you talk about those small steps and the fact that you want to progress up into a leadership role, and just realizing that you have so much to offer. Women quite often don't put themselves forward for leadership roles because of a lack of, I think, maybe confidence or headspace. As we talk about headspace, I don't know if I have time or energy, because we can all be quite perfectionists, and want to do everything that we do to the best of our ability. But I think it's making sure you take a small step, because you never know where it could lead.
Gosh, I mean, I'm feeling empowered to start heading after leadership positions myself.
Yes.
So thanks, Jen, and over to you, Pierre.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jennifer. And you triggered something. So I'll start with a quick comment and then a question for you, because we're a young company. We are a partnership, which is not always the case in our industry. And we wrote a partnership agreement. And one of the big discussions we had at the time were about parental leave. And we thought that we need to acknowledge that everyone is different. In a way, you're a woman with a different woman, there's different situation. You're a man is different situation. So we thought, how do we acknowledge the difference and make it not rigid? So we worked a lot on options that people can trigger depending on their personal circumstances. And we never put a word on that. And when you said equity and what you were doing, I thought that's exactly that. And we were not part of the Causeway a year ago, so we couldn't be at the event about equity. So thank you very much for that. And I will steal it from you and part of what you said, if you don't mind.
Please do.
Reference. And sorry, I come back to my question is, how do you transcribe that equity concept within the formal rules of the organization you're part of? Because it's one thing to share it, but how do you make it a rule which still stays hopefully flexible?
I think in the GA it's very difficult, because the rules that we have are a rule book, and there isn't very much on being equitable. So within your own structures, within your own governance, we're just starting now to have groups on equity and inclusion. And that is our first step, is to make sure that we have a group that makes that the culture and makes that the theme throughout the organization, where it's not necessarily having to be written down. It is through all of our processes. Obviously, having different policies and ways of working, I guess, is very, very important. But it's that culture that you create throughout, where your leadership positions and are driving that agenda forward. So the answer is, I guess, it's not really written down. Maybe it should be, and maybe that's what I'll take away from this, definitely. But I think the first step is making sure it's part of your culture. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Pierre.
okay. Thanks.
Tanya, I can see you have your hand raised. In the interest of time, what we might do is save the questions for the end after the speakers, and I hope that's all right. Just because we're going to enter just a moment into our first breakout room, and I want to make sure that we've got the time to kind of really expand on building our network of strong, empowering women and men and everyone that we've kind of got here today. So, Bridget, if we could launch the breakout rooms, that would be great.
Bridget.
Were you not invited, Judith?
No.
Oh, I have you in a room.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry. It's
Saying
fine.
that you haven't joined. You're in room 3.
Okay.
I wanted you to facilitate it with
Shit.
Tanya.
Okay. Can you do it again?
I can't.
Ah, balls. Sorry, Bridget.
Hold on, I'll try moving you to another room and then moving you back to room 2. So don't accept. I'm just going to try moving you to room 1 and then move you back because it won't let me. Okay, and now I'm going to try and move you back.
Oh, hang on. Yeah.
But I
Okay.
don't want you to accept that one because I wanted you in the room with Tanya because
Bridget, I'm back again. Okay, I'm going now.
Hi, Andrea. Welcome back.
Thank you. Am I the first back? Did I hit the wrong button? Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. We said it's closing, then it gives you a few seconds to before
Sorry,
it
I
kicks you
jumped out.
Yeah.
Don't worry, it's okay.
Zoom isn't as rude as Teams in terms of just booting everybody
That's
out.
why I was saying, Bridget, I was like, oh, we only have a few seconds. I really thought we would be interrupted because Teams really does just
Teams
kick
boots
you
you out,
out.
yeah. Whereas we had allowed a minute for people just to finish their conversations, so that
We're trickling back in there. We were in the depths of chat, which I'm sure many of the other breakout rooms were also.
very short.
I know it goes quickly, and yes, apologize. I realized I had a topic of discussion which I forgot to say in the excitement of us all going into the rooms. So I'm not sure if anyone else managed to get around to it, but we were discussing what inclusion meant to us, and there was a lot of layers, as Shauna said it, and kind of being unpacked. So thanks everyone for sharing, and I have to say the kind of honesty and authenticity everyone is bringing to this webinar is hugely appreciated. So thanks, and let's keep going with that theme. So I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, which is Jude McCorry, and Jude is the CEO of the Cyber and Fraud Centre Scotland. Jude, you're really warmly welcome to today's event.
Thank you very much. It's great hearing everybody else's stories. Just to let you know, I'm really, really tired today as a CEO. So we've had a lot of cyber attacks and a lot of things around. So I've had very long days and long nights. So I might not be in top form tonight. But it's fine. We've got a long weekend now this weekend. So a bit that I want to talk about. So I left Ireland 20 years ago and I moved over here and I took a job with a PR agency. And my husband's Scottish, so I moved over. It was a toss-up between Ireland or Scotland, and Scotland won. So at the time, I was really happy doing that. So the first within 2 years, then I was pregnant and worked for this agency. I ran it in Scotland, and the owners were from London. And when I was 8 months pregnant, I came into the office one day and the owners were there, had come up from London for a big pitch, and I walked in and they'd seen me a few times being pregnant, but they hadn't. So I was 8 months pregnant at the time, and they were like, "Oh my God, you're showing." And it was actually the woman that said it to me, and I was like, she's a mother of 2 kids, and I was like, "Sorry?" And she goes, "You're actually showing, and we're going to do this pitch." So she said, "Can you not stand up? Because if the clients know that you're pregnant, we won't win the business because you'll be missing from the business for a while."
Oh,
so I was a real career woman and stuff, and I was thinking, when I have this baby, then I'll be back straight in. So that kind of did throw me, and I still think, like, after going, I actually cannot believe that somebody would have said that. And then the way home in the taxi, she told me I stood up to give out a leaflet to somebody, and they would have noticed my stomach.
I love to think that now I'll be able to turn around and say something about that, but it's so hard in that moment.
It was 20 years ago, but it still was, 19 years, my daughter's 19 now, but it was still one of those things that it was like, I actually cannot, it was a man that said it, you'd be like, yeah, there are men that would say that, but this was a woman, and it was like all about money and stuff. So I always had the thing in my mind that then I'm going to work for employers that actually respect parents. So when I continued on working, when the baby, when Hannah was 8 months old, then I went back to work. And then she was nearly a year old, and my husband was in a really bad cycling accident. And everybody that I worked with in the team in the office were all single ladies. So nobody was married. They didn't have kids and stuff. And then that had the next stage of feeling that you'd no support as well. So you had this really good career, you're running a PR agency, but I wasn't 100% bought in that I was in the right company, that's the way they would treat mothers and mothers to be. So I thought, I can put pressure on myself and look after husbands in intensive care with no support and drop the baby into a nursery and pick her up and then bring her out to the hospital at night and leave her with people. or I just leave and I take some time out and I get my head straight and I support my husband and I look after my daughter myself rather than doing that. And why am I knocking my pan in for somebody that doesn't really care? So, and I made that decision, and after that it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. And I was in a good, it's not everybody can make those decisions because you do have mortgages and stuff. But I just sold my house in Ireland and I was like, well, I can't afford to do it. But you can understand if I hadn't had that space, the time to do that, or the money to do it, that I would have probably been left then to push something through. And I don't know how that would have helped, that would have affected my mental health as a parent. So after that, I always chose my employers very carefully. I looked at, what way they looked after parents. I then tried to improve things if things weren't great in organizations to help people, because what I felt was that I had that, and I'm sure all mothers in here as well would have that mother's guilt, that you're trying to do your best. You're trying to do the best job that you can. You've got, you're capable of doing it, but you're holding yourself back at times and you're rushing out the door if a child's sick and stuff. So I took over as CEO in the Cyber and Fraud Centre 4 years ago. It was the week of COVID. So it's actually this time 4 years ago that I started with a team that I'd never met. So I had to actually start the organization, and the organization was a going concern. I didn't know that either, so we didn't know if we'd make payroll at the end of the month. So yeah, I had a week to try and get money in, stuff to pay the wages. And once the first month was out of the way, then I was like, right, we've got another 30 days of breathing space. So turned the organization around. But again, you're talking about when's the right time to do things like that. So my daughters are older now. So 4 years ago, Hannah was 14, 15, and then Megan was 8. So it was the right time for me to do things. And actually COVID was quite good to us as an organization, because I was able to sit and chill and relax and get things done, rather than my first few months as a CEO, you'd be out for dinners, you'd be out for meetings and stuff. So the whole world stopped. So I was able to put a lot of effort into it. My younger daughter went feral. So she was in her last year at primary school. I didn't know what she was doing, and my older daughter was doing her exams, and so I was just trying to help her. So I just left the other one to do TikTok or do whatever she was going to do until the summer. So it was like, I was watching all these other mothers saying they get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and they do their work and then they come back and they help out with school. I was like, we would end up hating each other if I had to do that with my younger daughter. So she hates me most days anyhow, but so when I took over, then there was no kind of like family work-life balance. I looked at people on a Friday during COVID. We were absolutely shattered doing Teams meetings, Zoom. So we put in a rule: no Teams, no meetings on a Friday, and just catch up with things, because it was just one meeting after the other. We were drained. So then I said, look, your kids are at home, so everybody take Friday afternoons off. So we started doing a 4.5-day week. Then I was like, why are we logging on for a few hours on a Friday? Could we not just do this on a Thursday evening? And then we've got all Fridays off. So we did a trial of a 4-day week, and everybody gets paid for 5 days. And we did that for 6 months. And the boards were like, she only wants to do it for a trial. And the results were amazing. So it was like less sick days. Everybody just pulled together as a team. They knew on a Monday what had to be done, and they just got on with it for the week. And then Thursdays we sent her updates and what the priorities were for the week, and it was just worked out really well. We also looked at things like parental leave, and we spoke about that earlier on. And it was like, when I joined, it was unpaid parental leave, and I was like, kids are going to get sick. That's, and then if you've got 2 kids, one kid gets sick and they're okay, and the next thing is a tag team and the second one gets sick. So you could be 2 weeks of a I'm sorry for anybody who doesn't have kids in this group that I'm putting you off it. They are great, really. But so I was like, well, we can do this. And, I was getting so much out of the employees. So we do 5 days paid parental leave. And I was like, as long as you just check in with work in the evening time or in the morning time before the kids, or if the kids asleep and stuff. So you're just not like going missing for 5 days or 10 days or whatever. And if it is longer that you need, we'll look at it then on a case-by-case basis. And then 2 years ago, just after COVID, so my dad had Parkinson's for years, and then he died 2 years ago. And the thing that I looked at then as well, and I missed him to bits, but it probably made me a better person around looking at who's got carers duties and stuff as well. So it's not you know, I shouldn't just be looking at parental leave, I should be looking at other leave as well. And also, you know, when my dad was dying, I was able to take that time, and I had a really good team that I could go missing and spend that time with them. I kept on thinking about, if I worked in other organizations, would I have been able to do that? And imagine the regrets as a person then later on, especially when your parents live in a different country and things. So it's like that life cycle thing, that it's, you know, we have to support people in organizations around everything. And I was there to support my mum. I was there to support, you know, to help pick up my sister from an airport. So I was able to live in Ireland for a few weeks and keep up to date with things that are going on. So it's just, if you're able to do it, and we're talking about diversity and stuff as well, we can talk about that as well. But it's, if you are in a position to do it, use your position to do it and to help people and to turn it around. And then people would say to me, do people abuse it? You know, we've got probably 1 or 2 people that did, but I always said, we're not going to change everything because 1 or 2 people abuse the system. We'll just keep going, and we'll, you know, have those open and honest conversations with people saying, you can't do it that way. And actually the staff started doing it because they didn't want to lose out on having a Friday off. So it kind of, I was like, this is your thing. It's not just a CEO thing. This is a team thing. And if we want to protect this for the next few years, and for, if this is going to be a thing that we do, then we have to look at things like this. So that's my rather depressing story.
Wow. I mean, Jude, the thread throughout all of that is just resilience, is what I'm getting, to, you know, constantly be facing these challenges throughout. It's such an interesting story to hear now.
We're all gonna have that, you know, at some stage. And you don't expect it when you don't have kids, or you've got this new baby and you're in that bubble. You don't expect how hard it's going to be. Don't get me, you know, it is an amazing experience to be able to do what you're doing, and to be able to, that now I'm able to do what I want to do because my kids are good and they're settled and stuff. But when they're younger, no father will have the same guilt as a mother has.
And now you're in a position as a CEO where you can make these changes, which is empowering. So I guess my question to you, Jude, is what as a CEO do you do that trickles down to kind of foster this kind of air of inclusion, but also what do you expect, or what as an employee of an organization can we do to support that as well?
It's not, you know, things are not going to be easy. You're still going to have to look, and sometimes it's trial by error. So that's what we thought we'd do, the 4-day thing in 3 months. We said we'd do a trial for that. 3 months wasn't enough. We had so many, you know, it should be a good thing to do, but it's so many different problems that go back and they go. It was like having a rule book for 4 days, you know, well, if we do this, then what happens with this? And there weren't that many organizations to go to looking for help around it. And I was like, if we want this, we will make it work. So don't give up, because, you know, I've got this site. So we went into the board and we said, we're going to extend it by another 3 months. That I probably would have stopped it after the 3 months, because there was so many people coming. And I was like, I didn't make this 4-day-a-week thing. This is something we want to make ourselves, so we can then learn and gather the data. As long as we had the data on what was happening as well, we could back up what we were doing. But people say, is it easy? It's not easy. Nothing around making things better for people is easy. But you've got a choice. You can either make it better, or you can just keep doing the status quo. The other thing that I like doing as well is making sure that younger women, sometimes I feel that it's always the same people. When you're a woman in tech and you're a woman in cyber, I get so many invites. I'm not, this is not me blowing my own trumpet, but it's just like, oh, we'll get Jude along. Or it's like, this week I've been on Sky News, I've been on BBC. So it's like as if I'm filling the void for women in cyber. But what I want to do is encourage more younger people to come out and do this. So we do kind of like very small breakfasts and stuff for women in cyber, so that you're trying to encourage women, to let them know that they have something to give and that they have something to say. It just shouldn't always be just coming from me. So that's the kind of, and then they're going, well, actually, and just including them and then putting them on a panel, or, you know, also when it comes to panels around diversity as well, the amount of times that I get invited to something, I look at the panel and there could be like 18 men and I'm the token woman in there. So I say, no, I'm not doing that. And then, you know, the minute you say it, their back is up, because are you accusing us of? And I was like, no, I'm just not comfortable sitting as the only woman on a panel of 18. Whereas what we do is when we're doing events, we plan the events around diversity. So it's like, who do we invite to do this? How do we don't just do, there's a panel and that's the best person for that, you know, it has to be around, well, you know, it's going to take us longer to do it because we can find, of course, we can find a lot of men to talk about cyber, but we put time and effort into it to make sure that and also people are, younger women that come to me and they go, I'm really nervous about doing it. I was like, I'll help you get the topic, get the theme. I'll spend 5-10 minutes, people looking for their next jobs. You know, do you want me to write you some references? Do you want me to look at your CV to help you with your questions around, you know, what you should be preparing for, all that kind of stuff? So yeah, we just, and I think sometimes as well, I've got this saying as well, if you cannot see it, you cannot be it. So spend time with younger, and even not even just younger people in schools. That's where I get, you know, I go in there, I get so much energy because I'm like, these people are the future. And then they come up to you in 6 months or a year's time, I've chosen this because of you. And you're like, great. Then you're going, actually, if I hadn't went in, then they would have been off in a different direction. A lot of girls don't choose cyber because they think it's something to do with maths, and maths has got nothing to do with cybersecurity. So I've got one daughter that hates maths and one that absolutely loves it. It's so easy for her. So you can understand, I hated maths. Like, there's no way I would have chosen cybersecurity when I was in school.
No, thanks so much, Jude. The kind of wisdom and messages that you've left us, I think all of us have got an air of visibility. And when we can be those women who are visible, it doesn't matter who it's to. That's our role, and that's going to be my takeaway. So Jude, thanks so much for taking the time out from your incredibly busy and tiring schedule.
Okay, I'm
really
fine.
Appreciate it. And back over to Jen.
Thanks, Megan, and thank you, Jude. And I have the privilege of welcoming our final speaker today, Dr. Tanya Muclachy, Director of the Health Innovation Hub Ireland, which creates a vital bridge between startup ventures and the public health procurement system. She's also behind Femtech, which I'm very interested to hear about, at the Hub, which supports the drive for more female founders in STEM. Tanya, thank you so much for coming. I know it's been an intense hour and a half with a lot of discussion. So thank you to you and everyone else for your patience. It's been a very, very great webinar. I guess we'll kick it off. I'm very interested in hearing more about the bias towards male-centric healthcare and how that has shaped the medical landscape, and how you're seeing it now.
Yeah, no problem. First of all, I have to say I'm somewhat humbled to be on this panel with all the amazing women, and I have to say first of all, I'm listening to Andrea and I'm wearing a bright color, and I've also experienced that can you make a coffee with 3 other men probably getting a lower salary than me in the room, and me going, that's not worth my time. You're paying me to do a job and it's not make coffee. So I do think people have to stand up and say things like that, or no, I'm not going to make the coffee, you make the coffee. So there are things like that we just have to say, and you have to just take it. Some people will not be happy with you and other people will. But I guess, yeah, so if we talk specifically about health and the whole femtech space, I guess for those that don't know, femtech is about the development of products and services really aimed at women's health, and particularly issues that affect women differently than men. And I'm using women in the context, if you're born a woman and you have female hormones and a uterus and all the things that women experience through their lifetime. What would shocked me as a biochemist, but is just amazing that we've allowed it to happen, is that less than 3% of the global world health research budget is spent on women's health research. And we are 50% of the world population. And that alone is just shocking. But it's also the reason why there are things like endometriosis that take 10 years to diagnose and there's no actual treatment for it. Things that affect women in their working lives. I was shocked to know that as a biochemist, I should know everything about this, but we were not taught the details of what endometriosis was, again, because the research wasn't there. And for those, and just even if you just look it up when you go home, but it's the endometrium cells growing outside of where they should normally grow. So they grow in other parts of your body. And then what happens when your hormones, like when you're having a regular period, your hormones tell those cells to start releasing. And if those cells are in your pelvis or in your bladder or in another part of your body, you experience pain. You experience the equivalent of period pain or even more. So some people are so debilitated that they lose control of their bowels, if that's where it's going, or they lose control of their bladder, or they're just in so much pain that they can't function. And I've met really highly functioning women who've told me that they have to spend days at home because they cannot function when they're going through this part of their life. And it just shocks me that we haven't put the research into it, and two, that there are very few programs in working organizations that acknowledge these things that women go through. They expect people to just go through them, and the reason is that not enough people know about it. So the whole space of women's health, from even from the early adolescence all the way to our death, we experience so many things differently to men. Women are more likely to get dementia than men, Alzheimer's, our bone health, our mental health. We have, perimenopause and menopause. The hormonal change at that stage really affects people in their working lives now, because we're all working at those stages. But then it's women who are dealing with fertility issues, pregnancy loss, maternity, not just the health side of it, as you say, standing up in an office and in a meeting and someone saying, you better not show your stomach because they're not going to want to buy our products. Like, I don't get that. I worked in large industry in the US, and when you're on maternity leave in the US, which is a very, very short length of time, you are on a disability allowance. That is what you are. You're disabled, and so that's your allowance, disability allowance. So it's not even maternity. It's so there are so many things in the women's health space that we haven't discussed and we haven't talked about. And so this femtech movement is about supporting the development of products and services that address women's health in particular, but it's only at the start of it. There's so many opportunities out there for women, and most of the companies in this space have a female founder. So that whole area of talking about women's health issues, developing solutions in that space, and supporting, being part of trials and being part of studies in that space is really important. And it's something I'm very passionate about, but I think very few people even understand the significance of the lack of investment in women's health research.
And I think to bring it back to the theme this year is inspire inclusion. And I think femtech is doing just this. It's not just inspiring inclusion within how we assess symptoms, etc., but it's also giving the space for these female startups. Mm-hmm. So how does femtech offer the space for these female startups to grow? And is it including of women of all backgrounds, etc.?
Yeah. So look, the area that I work in is helping startups and companies to develop products and services across the healthcare space. So what we established was an ecosystem of trying to get people to support femtech in particular. And really, if you're going to develop a solution in that space, you really often have a problem yourself, and you might have an idea to solve it. Then what we help individuals do is try and get funding, and we guide them along the product development pathway. We don't charge for that service. It's provided at no cost. But a really important part of developing a product in the health space is engaging with clinicians and whether it's nurses, physiotherapists, anyone that would be using the product, prescribing the product, or dealing with a patient that has those symptoms. So we will help anywhere from helping you with your idea to try and get funding and get it off the ground, to testing a prototype in a clinical setting, or if you have a product and you need people to use it, we can go out to a healthcare organization or to patients and get them to use it and feedback on it. In some cases, we've worked with a couple of companies who just wanted individuals to use their prototype product, and they were able to gather data to develop an algorithm that would allow them to diagnose in the future, or gather symptoms from people and allow them to develop a mechanism to diagnose better. So there's loads of opportunities in that space, and you need all backgrounds. Like, you don't have to be anything in particular in terms of career. You have to have a problem and a need and bring your expertise to the table, whether you're a lawyer, nurse, anything, ICT, anything, that you need everyone to work together to develop those solutions.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I could speak on this webinar for ages, but I think one last question for you, Tanya, personally about your career, to someone who's kind of just beginning their kind of professional career, what would be one piece of advice kind of going forward?
Okay, just really quickly, my experience is, and like some of the other speakers here, I'm always asked to be the woman on the interview panel. I'm always asked to be the, can you, like the mentor or the guide or whatever it is. I'm on a lot of those. But the one thing I find is that someone said it earlier, we're perfectionists, and you don't need to be a perfectionist. You don't have to be perfect when you're going for that job. I would say, I interview people, and the males going for the job might have 7 out of the 10 criteria, and the women will only have 10 out of the 10 because they won't apply for it unless they have the 10. And you should apply for anything because you should be confident in yourself that you are going to be able to get that. And the other thing I find is we always are negative about our ability. So we would say things like, I would ask women at interviews, and there'd be men coming too, and I'd say, what are you really good at? What's your number one kind of superpower? And they, oh, I'm not really sure. I'm good at everything, and a little bit good at everything, but not good enough at one thing. Whereas the man will say, I'm brilliant at this. So I think we need confidence in ourselves, and you need to not be a perfectionist. Like, you're good enough as you are, so just believe in yourselves and go for it.
Thank you so much. I've actually written it down. I will go through. You're so right. You have to go into these jobs thinking you have to be cookie cutter, fit it perfectly. And sure, if you get those jobs, you won't be able to grow from it because you already know everything. I think thank you so much, Tanya. Does anybody have any more questions? I know we're coming up to now 6 o'clock. It was a fantastic session. So if anyone has any couple of questions, if not, I can hand it to Bridget. Bridget, all yours. Oh, you're mute.
You're on mute there, Bridget, which is actually the only time we've had that for the whole webinar, which is very impressive.
Very good.
I did it on purpose so that there wouldn't be
because you're not a perfectionist, that's why.
Exactly, so that everybody would feel comfortable. Listen, I'm coming off spotlight because I think I just want to very quickly chat to everybody and feel everybody being in the room. And we have run slightly over, but it's because this has been a truly inspiring, quite intimate and honest conversation, and this stuff is important. For people who are watching online, I hope you've enjoyed our amazing speakers. I think sometimes it's important to say the things that aren't said in a room like this, where it's maybe a bit easier to say it. And in Causeway, we want to promote those kinds of conversations. For me, the only thing that wasn't mentioned, and I'm going to put it out there, is the impact of menopause on women's careers, and in terms of when we're talking about inclusivity and the things that people can go through that is still an uncomfortable conversation, and but an important one. But I think we've been really honest. I think we've looked at inclusivity in its broadest sense. It's not just about gender, it's about so many other things. I love some of the comments that were made, like the wearing color, the power of making a bold decision, taking action, even if it's initially small steps, the duty that we all have to hold hands with other people and help them on their career at whatever stage you're at in your career. To our speakers, you've been awesome, and I really appreciate it. And we need to continue these conversations in other rooms. To our amazing young professional hosts who have facilitated this so brilliantly. You really are showing us how it's done, and I'm very proud of the Young Professional Network in Causeway. So thank you for that. We're not rushing off, but I'm going to finish. If anybody wants to stay and ask any questions, please do. I've posted in the chat a link to our events. We've got lots of exciting stuff coming up. But from me, happy Women's Day, a bit late, and thank you all very much for coming along. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone.
Me and Megan can stay on for a couple more minutes. Anyone wants to ask any questions or anything like that? Any further comments?
I think, Tanya, did you have a question for me that you didn't get to
Yes.
What was my
You might have
question?
forgot what it was now.
I've forgotten what it was now.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry, I might remember it in a second.
No, it's okay. I find your talk really, really interesting. Just because I work in a school as my day-to-day job. I'm a teacher, and it is a totally female-dominated profession. And now even in secondary, we have very few male teachers. But there's lots of males in leadership roles. So a lot of our heads of department are all males. And so I think they don't understand the hormones and the emotions that are happening all the time around them.
I think you're so right, but I have 3 children and they're boys, but they are, and I think Bridget, you mentioned it there, they know everything about femtech and they know everything about menopause, and every time anything's going wrong they just go, oh God, it's menopause. And I said, yeah, you need to know about it. So I think one of the things we do need to do, and it's not just, it's everything. Like, I was so shocked when I heard about the impact endometriosis has on some women. I just couldn't believe that they were functioning. And I was going around with my head in the sand, not knowing some women were experiencing this type of, like pure pain at work. And we need to be discussing it openly. We shouldn't be ashamed of saying it. It's being a woman. We have these things. It's being a woman. So we do need to have those conversations all the time.
Yeah. I've said this before, Tanya, at another event about my son, and just I don't think he knew that male sport existed until recently, because he's always at the sideline watching me, and he's always, go mommy, and I want to play rugby like mommy, or I want to play football like mommy.
Amazing.
So I think that our sons are, might sound cliche, but our sons are key to normalizing all of these things, so that someday, if they do happen to have a female partner, that this isn't foreign to them, that they're not afraid to go and buy period products. They're not afraid to sit down and have conversations and to be that real life partner, and to be able to understand these things because they learned it from their mom.
Yeah, and it'll have that impact on everything. So like when you do go for your interview, and if you happen to be pregnant at your interview, if the men are all men, they'll understand it. They'll say, yeah, that's normal.
Exactly. And they'll say, I saw my mom do it, and I saw her have a career, and I saw, so
I remember years ago being on an interview panel, and before we had, I guess, the sort of more objective way of assessing people, and it was generally, well, I like her, I don't like him. But I remember it was a mixed panel. It was mixed applicants. There were some men and some women. And one of the male panel, I think he might have been the chair of the panel actually, only asked the women, had they plans, in terms of children and that. I remember, I do remember calling it out and saying, I don't think we're meant to ask that. So I suppose we have come a long way, but I think it's that implicit, implicit sort of inequalities or exclusion or discrimination, that even people aren't aware that they're thinking, but people would be looking at a woman who's maybe, thinking, well, are they likely to have a child in the next few years? So even though you have to be very careful now about how you assess people on the basis of their competencies and, experience, etc., I do think there's a lot of bias that people themselves aren't aware of. So I do think that point you made, Tanya, I think around your sons know everything about menopause, I would say that's probably unusual. But I think there has been, just in the last even 2 years, I think there's been an awful lot more focus on menopause, whereas previously it was a completely sort of taboo subject. I mean, you would die rather than mention anything. And I think it's almost that it's seen as a weakness if you're, it's like the comment I made at the beginning about coming back to work after having my first child. And I had to go back a bit like you, Jude, 3 months, my baby was only 3 months old, and it was really difficult. I found it a really hard thing to do. But I just remember this pressure to sort of really make sure that I didn't in any way, be a mother at work, so you had to, really try and overcompensate. And I think that has changed. I can see my daughter now with her children, and I think there's much more, much more acceptability. I do think virtual working has helped women to some extent. I mean, there may be a disadvantage we find further down the road, but I think allowed a bit more flexibility in terms of people's engagement. But I think we still have a bit to go in some of that bias that people aren't even aware that they have.
I heard an interesting thing recently. It was at an International Women's Day event, and there were speakers talking about how they got to the level of their career that they got to. And she was a really, really brilliant speaker, but she was saying that her advice from other men about getting the job was not to be so emotional in the interview. And everyone was saying, oh yeah, I get, and I just said, but we women by nature are emotional. That's kind of a benefit we have. We see things slightly differently. We get emotional sometimes, but it shouldn't be seen as a bad thing. So I feel like there's still a lot of conversation needs to be had, particularly among women. If someone calls out, oh, she's just a bit emotional, you have to say, but that's a good thing, and that's passion, or it's it's part of our DNA to be emotional, and you should kind of accept that and acknowledge that it's a good thing, because it'll bring, I know, empathy, compassion, passion, whatever you want to call it, to the job. But we still, I think as women, we still are a little bit reluctant to acknowledge that kind of thing, that it's still, as you said, it's maybe still seen a little bit as a negative, some of the things, whereas we shouldn't. They're all positive. Being a woman is very positive.
It is.
And I think you're sort of expected. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bridget.
No,
sorry.
go, Jen, go.
I was just going to say, I think, in my role, like, I was more maybe expected to be more of a soft touch, and not be as firm as my male counterparts would have been on certain issues. So I think I found myself a lot of time, trying to lean on, what does the rule book say, and what is written down, and what can I prove? And whereas I feel like that's maybe for male counterparts, they don't have to be as well versed, that their word is just taken. Whereas I think as a female, you have to prove yourself a lot more, and you have to actually earn their respect, but at least once it's there, it's there. I feel.
Well, you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks. Trying. But yeah, no, thanks, Megan. Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna go and start my Easter holidays.
It's been
Tanya,
amazing.
if you remember the question, just email me.
Oh yeah, okay, thanks.
We'll see you again soon at the Causeway event.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bridget. Thank you. Bye.